Well, I'm back again, and I've got a little video for you guys today, and I'm going to try to whip through this one in about 20 minutes. No use in making it too long or just talking really slow so that we can fill up the time. And I've had a lot of instructors that would do that. They don't have enough material, so they talk really slow. Now I'm going to stop and tell a story or two on the way. I hope it's okay. This was back in '77. I was working with Davis Auto Service, and the guy that was the main guy, he says, this car is quitting. Wasn't a very old car then. I think it was a 76 model, might have been a 75. And it looked a lot like this. This is not a picture of the actual car, but what happened was he said, this thing's quitting ever so often and I need to drive it. I'm going to go out Bellwood Road and I want you to come after me if I'm not back in about 15 or 20 minutes. And I said, okay. So this thing right here had HEI on it. Remember the HEI when it first came out in General Motors cars? This is how it was wired up. There's that little module everybody got so used to for a long time. This was before we had any kind of module that had 5 pins on one side and all that kind of stuff. But the pickup coil was connected to the orange and the blue. Interestingly enough, even on the Ford ignition systems, orange and blue seemed to be the magic color for the pickup coils. Then your ground is what it used to fire the coil. That's what that ground was for. Your ignition switch was feeding the hot side of the coil, and then the negative side was there. See, so this coil right here was turned on pin B, and then pin C operated the coil. And here's your pickup coil and your ground over there. Not too complicated, really. You know, the coil was really in the middle of the distributor, so there was some wire in here. This is just a basic hookup on it. Anyway, he says, before I head out here to go, 45 minutes later, he told me to come after him in 15 or 20 minutes because he was sitting beside the road out there if he wasn't back before then. And 45 minutes later, I realized I'd forgotten him. Time kind of got away from me, okay? So I went zooming out there. And so he actually hadn't thought of it bringing anything to poke up in the wire to see if he had any spark, like a screwdriver or anything. Didn't have a pocket screwdriver with him. I guess I always carry one, except I didn't have one that day. Anyway, he gets a piece of heater hose out of the back of the truck, and he works it onto the pocket knife, figures this rubber is going to keep him from getting shocked. The only problem is that heater hose got fiberglass in it, and when he stuck it up into that plug wire, that thing fired him up good. The spark had come back while he was sitting there, and it came back enough to shock him. But the problem was this bulkhead connector right here. There was a wire that was pushed back. That's all that was wrong with that car. It took him a little while to figure it out, but there it was. You get these come and go wiring problems. Really annoying whenever somebody comes and they says, sometimes my wipers don't work, or sometimes my stoplights don't work, or sometimes this doesn't work or that doesn't work. Like on this one Nissan Altima, this lady said she would turn on her fan, and for a little while it would not do anything, and then it would start blowing about 5 minutes later, and that turned out to be one of those potted relays like these Nissans have on them. We took the relay that was feeding the rear window defrost and we swapped places with it, and her fan came on immediately. That was fairly easy to figure out. Alright, so when a short or an open though is consistently present, it's not, even then it's not always easy to pinpoint because there's so many harnesses. Now this right here is a harness routing and stuff on like a 92 Crown Victoria, and even back then the harnesses went all over the place. And so a lot of cases the smartest thing to do is just bypass the circuit that's not operating, and I've done that before. You cut it loose on each end if it's got a short, and then you get some wire loom and you pull the wire through there and you route it in such a way to where you know it's not going to get in trouble. You don't want to wrap it around the drive shaft, right? So basically wherever you're going to run it. Case in point, there was a Chevrolet pickup truck that we worked on not too long, well, less than a year ago, and that thing had no speed signal whatsoever. And it turned out that the speed sensor had been replaced and all the obvious stuff had been done, and that thing had an open circuit between the speed sensor and the engine controller, whatever it was. Anyway, we ran a new wire all the way back, and it brought it online. So one way or another, it's a little more difficult if the thing splits and goes out everywhere. Like on this one here, this light blue red circuit, you might recognize on a Ford, goes out to all the dash light stuff and everything. And if just one of those is a problem, then you are going to have to, only overlay the one. You can't just, you got to make sure that the wire you're overlaying is not going other places. That's important. Okay. All right. So, nothing like a stop lamp circuit had an intermittent short when I was at the dealer back in the day. What we would do, if it kept giving trouble and we couldn't ever get it to act up, we would put one of these self-resetting circuit breakers in there. Basically, put it in between the power and the load part of the circuit, and that way, even if there was a momentary short there, it would basically trip that breaker, but it would come right back. It's like a self-replacing fuse. But you make sure whenever you're doing that, you've got one that's not too many amps. You got to pay attention to how many amps, this one here, the one I've got pictured right here, that little bow picture that you got is a circuit breaker, and this right here is a fuse, a little S. Typically the way that is. And the wires on the old fuse panels, you could get to the back of it easier, and you could basically mount your circuit breaker. Now these kind of circuit breakers here are not as robust as that kind of circuit breaker. I really like these better than I did those there, because those, I don't know how much those could handle before they started giving trouble, and get to where they wouldn't work at all. But what you would do is take that fuse. We were actually told to do this. We would take this and get rid of the fuse and replace it with that circuit breaker. That's what we do. Mount the thing really good and all that. Now think of the wire harness as car's nervous system. That's basically how all the signals get from here, there, to yonder, from your switches to your actuators to your motors and to your engine stuff and all that. This AC harness was damaged because somebody had not secured this harness right, and it got over against the belt. That belt makes a dandy saw. And if you're ever putting a timing belt on a car and you fool around and let the crank sensor wire flop around loose because you didn't secure it in its anchor points, and you're going to have it getting over against the belt, and it's going to be sitting beside the road somewhere. I was always concerned that if I worked on a car and didn't do something right and it quit in a bad part of town, what might happen to whoever was driving it. That always bothered me. A lot of the aircraft mechanics say, well, somebody could die if we don't do our job right. Well, that's true, but somebody can die if an auto mechanic doesn't do their job right too. And there's a whole lot more different ways, All right, so components that move. This right here was on a vehicle that had a shifter. It was on a 06 Impala. And she went out, she called me one day and she says, I can't get my car out of park. And so I went over there and I found out that these wires right here that go to the little solenoid, it releases a gear selector, had been bent back and forth enough that they had broke the wires loose. And that was what was wrong with that one. So also there's the stoplight wires on some vehicles. If you mash the brake enough, the stoplight wires will bend and bend and bend, and they'll finally come in too. But anyway, we had to fix that. You see where those wires were broke. Now, when you're chasing an intermittent, and I put a video on there the other day about this, when you're chasing an intermittent concern, it's not there all the time, and you're going to be pulling around on wire harnesses. You need to put something in place so that whenever you move it, if you discover the problem, you need to see some indicator, visual, sound, I don't care what it is, some kind of an indicator that you found the problem, and that will lead you to it a whole lot better than just jerking around on the wire harness. Now, if it's an intermittent concern, another thing you need to be doing is don't grab a hold of the harness before you actually shine a bright light down there and look everywhere you possibly can for anything you might see. One time there was this guy that had a van that he had taken to every shop in town that was running bad, and he said he came to me over there and they wrote him up a ticket, and he said the last place I came was the dealer because I felt like I was going to get shafted here. And so he said, but I've already spent $750 every shop in town to replace parts all over this thing, and it's still doing the same thing. And all I did was pull the doghouse off of it, the engine cover, and I looked around there with my bright flashlight, and I saw where the engine harness was scratching on a bracket, and it had made, I pulled it back and I could see copper, and so I fixed all that for him and everything. And in that particular day and time, I could decide what to charge somebody, and then they would do, they would charge what I said, and I charged the guy $20 to make a point. because I was hoping he would be, come to us first time, it's not to say that independent shops are all bad. A lot of them are better than dealers in some cases, but in that particular case, we fixed the thing for 20 bucks without putting a single part on it. Another part of it is if everybody else has already changed all the parts, then they've eliminated a lot of stuff that you don't have to worry with, unless they put aftermarket parts that are junk. I've seen that kind of thing too, and sometimes you just got to back up and re-replace something they replaced that was a bad brand. Alright, well, you can use a short finding with a circuit breaker. You can build one of these little tools, and on the next slide I've got a schematic of it. Here's your 12 volt. Notice I put an 8 amp circuit breaker on there. That way you're not going to burn up the wires you're testing. So you want to make sure that the weak link in your chain is the circuit breaker. And when you plug that in, you've seen these little tools you can buy right here that'll let you plug into a fuse. Alright, so I plugged into that fuse with a circuit breaker, and on the other side of these little terminals here, it's going to here, and then this is going to this light, which is just basically a park light or a tag light or whatever. And so what happens is every time that short happens, that light will come on when the breaker is open, and then it'll go off when the breaker's closed. And if you're going around here checking your stuff, and this will happen pretty quickly. It'll go ding, 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 and you can actually go and find where your problem was. Now, one place that was really useful where I used this was on a Chevrolet pickup. We pulled a mass airflow sensor code, and it turned out that the power going to the mass airflow sensor was non-existent because it had blown a fuse. When we put another fuse in it, it blew right away. So we hooked this rig up, and while it was blinking off and on, looking at the schematic, we ran around unplugging components. And when we got to the oxygen sensor, that was the O2, it was oxygen sensor HO22. It was behind the catalytic converter back there on that side. We unplugged that oxygen sensor, and that stopped clicking. We had a shorted oxygen sensor heater, which didn't throw us any kind of a code at all, but it was keeping power. It was on the same circuit as the power feeding the mass airflow, and so we replaced the oxygen sensor and fixed the mass airflow code. But there was no code for the oxygen sensor. Anyway, it was this tool that enabled us to find that. You can also use a forward-looking infrared camera to find the hot spot, and that's really important. Sometimes if you've got a whole lot of lights that are being fed by the same harness, it's come off of a splice and it goes to the light in the ceiling and the ones in the sun visors and all this kind of stuff. If you're watching this thing click off and on, the lights that are, the legs going to the lights that are not shorted, the light will come on very dimly. One of the lights, if it doesn't come on, it's the leg going to that one on your spider harness. Remember, the light that doesn't come on, all the rest of them are coming off and on real dim as this breaker cycles. You find the one that doesn't come on, that's going to be your one that's got the short leading to it. Now here's an engaging starter story. 1999 Ford Ranger starter sometimes engages when the key is switched on. Well, when we had it in there, anytime you turn the key to the on position, that starter would go to spinning up a storm. And switching the key to the run position, you didn't even have to turn it to start. After it started, the starter remained engaged, and the starter drive's overrunning clutch would be working overtime until we turned the key off, and then it would quit spinning. And that overrunning clutch is kind of like what you got in a Briggs Stratton lawnmower. It's got these little springs. It's actually a sprag clutch, kind of like you'd have in a transmission, because these are rolling up ramps. And whenever it's turning one way, it is freely. The other way, it locks so that it can start the vehicle. All right. So where might the problem be? Pointed to a short circuit somewhere between the transmission range sensor and the ignition switch. We pulled the starter relay so we wouldn't be spinning the starter and causing all this grief and everything. So we basically wanted to put, this is just basically showing you the two pins on the relay. This is the coil. This is common, and that's normally open and that's normally closed. All right. So what we did was we took a light bulb and put right here. Right? Okay, with a light bulb in there, it was burning all the time when the key was on. That's how we look. That's our indicator. That's what we're looking at to show us when the problem's there and when it's not. See, the relay was removed when we pulled it out, and we just put that, let everything else alone. So there was no connection here, just a light bulb right here. You can use your little light bulb Doesn't need to pull that many amps. All right, when the ignition switch is in the start position, on the start terminal, ignition switch carries power from the battery through fuse 24, and fuse 24 right here, through the neutral safety switch all the way to the starter relay, and that spins the starter. Now, basically, I say that I didn't type that right. Basically, this right here flips that relay, and then this fuse, which is from the battery junction box, goes to this, pulls the starter. That's what it amounts to. And so anyway, see that solenoid right there? It flips that close, and then that starter, that's your starter solenoid spin over. Anyway, one way or another, before I get, all right, there's your key and run, your power goes here, this happens, and then that relay trips, and then that energizes the starter solenoid, and the starter solenoid pulls the starter in, and it starts spinning. That ain't too complicated. Well, we're trying to figure this thing out. We got our light burning over there, so we keep on pulling these here fuses here. We remove fuse 20, and the problem would go away. Okay, so where's fuse 20? Here's fuse 20. That's the one we pulled. This one's hot and run. You notice it's not hot and start, it's hot and run. And so somehow or another, there was power making it from this circuit over to the circuit, this one here. See that? So if somehow, I mean, it doesn't, these aren't tied together, but somehow there was a short circuit between circuit 1000 and circuit 1002. But anyway, just about any 12-volt bulb will work here. It doesn't have to be heavy load. All right, so since pulling fuse 20 killed the short, was it possible circuits 1000 and 102 were shorted together somewhere? Maybe they were shorted, melted together. I don't know. So maybe that circuit 1000 was backfeeding the ignition switch run power through fuse 28 to the starter relay coil, going this way. See? In other words, it would follow that path right there. So anyway, so here's these two circuits where they're coming out of the central timer module. They also, the central timer module was a watered down version of the GEM module. Okay, and so the GEM module was generic electronic module, showed up in 1995 to start with on Ford Windstars, but then they started putting them on other things. It basically controls anything that's timed, seatbelt buzzers and all other kinds of stuff, but it wears a lot of hats. All right. Well, look at this schematic for a minute. If the wires aren't shorted together, and we determined they weren't, what else could be wrong? So this is hot and run accessory. Remember that. Remember when we pull that fuse, this problem went away. But when that fuse is back in there, it was working. All right. I mean, it would turn it on. All right. Now this right here is the radio. Okay. Number 3. That's hot in start, and that's hot in start. So the radio has basically got a hot in start wire going to it for some strange reason. Why does the radio need to know when you're starting the truck, and this was just a base radio. One time we had a car that was, the wipers were going completely crazy on it. And we worried with that darn thing for a while, and it turned out when you disconnected the radio, the wipers would clean up their act. And so down in the boneyard, there was a car down there, there was some Ford Contour or something, had the same radio in it. And I went down there with my little horseshoe tools and jerked that radio out, brought it up there and plugged it into that truck that had the crazy wipers, and the wipers cleared up by replacing the radio. Now, I have no earthly idea what the wipers and the radio had in common. I couldn't find anything on the schematic, but I do know that radio, when I swap that radio out, those wipers quit giving trouble. So put that in your pipe and smoke it for what it's worth. I always like to find exactly what's going on so I can explain it to other people as well as myself. All right, so I went to the pinpoint section, radio section. I found an error. According to one particular test step, the circuit in question, which is circuit 1000 fed through fuse 28, has to be juiced up before the radio will work. But that wasn't true on this truck. And so I was saying, okay, so this fuse has to be in here to make the radio work. Well, it's only hot in start. So you're not going to listen to your radio and start anyway, right? All right, so I pulled fuse 28, just jerked it out of there, and the radio still worked. And further research revealed that the only reason the GEM module needed that circuit was related to illuminated entry as it interfaces with remote keyless entry. When you got your little fob, And it's kind of funny how this is interesting how Ford calls theirs the remote anti-theft personality module. That's what Ford calls theirs. Now on a General Motors car, it's got a route module too, but they call that retained accessory power. Those modules have got the same acronym, but they're two different modules entirely with different jobs. All right, 25 seconds have elapsed since the illuminated entry feature was activated. The courtesy lamp feature is not activated. And if the GEM receives a request from the route module, if you press a button on your fob, then the courtesy lamp feature is not activated. And if the ignition's in the run or start position in the courtesy lamp, so yeah, it's whenever you see it come on, you turn on the key, it goes off. You turn it on to start or whatever, I don't know. Anyway, this is what the whole deal was about that. This one didn't have remote anti-theft personality. It didn't have a wrap. So this was moot on that one. So the GEM module, if we figured that short was in there, that's going to be a $200 box. Back in those days, it's even more than that now. And by the way, don't try to take a GEM module off of one truck and put it on another one, even if you have the ability to reprogram it, because most of the time that's not going to work. You may get away with it a time or two, but it's a bad bet to try to get a GEM module out of a salvage yard and put it on something like an F-150, because crazy stuff goes on, like the wipers won't work right and all this kind of hogwash. I've seen that. Alright, so since the Ranger on its way, the problem never happened again. Now it's possible the circuit fed by fuse 28 might have been backfeeding through a bad diode in the central timer module, GEM module if you will. Even if it was, we had taken care of the problem by just removing the fuse. So, develop the desire to read. It's always really a good idea to go to your description and operation page. This is obviously from All Data, but you can find it anywhere that you've got any decent shop manual material. There's times when reading the description operation is crucial to understanding the repair path. Recognize that, learn it, and live it, because knowledge is power, and every one of us needs to know as much as we can about the systems we're working on. And it gets worse every day, because a lot of these vehicles, there's not a good way they could publish a book that's going to tell you what all the algorithms are and how they're all tied together to make things work. Even on older cars, like in the late 90s, on some of the GM cars, I've seen crazy stuff go on where you weren't exactly sure why this module was keeping that from happening. You might remember that other one that I uploaded that I didn't have voiceover on, where I had this Buick. The fan wouldn't run because the one of the modules under that, so two modules that are just alike. One of them is the HVAC programmer, and one of them is a body control module. And the body control module was monitoring the air conditioner, and it was basically bad, and it was preventing the PCM from turning the fan on. Even if it thought the engine was really, really hot, it wouldn't turn the fan on because the body control module was bad. I don't know why those were interfacing the way they were, but they were. This is the kind of stuff that you got to be smart enough to figure out, or you're going to wind up, the worst part about it is, you know, somebody leaves out of there with their fan not working or whatever because you didn't do it right. They burn it up, and then the people come back and say, hey, I burned my car up because you didn't fix it right, and so on and so forth. We don't want to go there. Hope you enjoyed this today, and it's just something that I stumbled across that I thought would be pretty interesting if you're a wiring guy, electrical guy. Maybe you got something out of it. If you aspire to be an electrical guy, maybe you got something out of it. If you don't like electrical, maybe you didn't enjoy it at all, but here it is.